Exodus. Dozens of Conservative MPs are not even fighting Sunak's general election, now joined by one of the biggest Tory beasts of all, Housing Secretary Michael Gove. Handshakes and hugs in Parliament tonight as more and more MPs bid farewell, and Andrea Leadsom, the latest big beast to go. We hear from our election panel and live from a Sunak loyalist who is standing. Labour's ahead in the polls, but is there danger from the left as Jeremy Corbyn says he'll stand against the party he led? We talk to a member of the shadow cabinet. Also tonight, with policing being stretched now more than ever, could live facial recognition help, and what impact could it have on people who get misidentified?
I'm just focused on going to where I'm going, getting through, and then all of a sudden, that's when I felt the nudge on the shoulder, saying, at that time I'm wanted.
Good evening. You could call it the big goodbye, the great resignation, but is it the giant surrender even? As Parliament is prorogued, the number of Conservative MPs standing down continues to grow. Our Joe Pike is here. Is this all a coincidence?
Certainly is not, Faisal. I was in Parliament earlier today. Not that many people were actually there, but those who were looked, some of them pretty downhearted. A lot of MPs carrying big bags of belongings out of their offices as they go back to their constituencies, or their constituencies of, for now at least. What has been remarkable today is, one, that we've passed the 1997 levels of Conservatives quitting Parliament. We've also reached the number of 80. Of course, partly this is because there are loads of Conservative MPs, because they are in power, they've got a majority, but also there are a whole host of personal reasons: retirement, illness, people wanting to pursue other careers. But yes, of course, it is a big factor that there are some Conservatives who don't want to run and lose, or run and win and be in a Parliament where they're no longer in power. Now, we haven't even got to the meat of the campaign. All of that could, of course, change, but at this stage, all the polls are pointing in one pretty clear direction. Michael Gove, as you mentioned tonight, a big beast leaving the political jungle, a fascinating character because he didn't reach one of the four great offices of state, but he has outlasted many of his contemporaries like David Cameron, like Boris Johnson, like Theresa May. A significant legacy, he would argue, in terms of Brexit, in terms of free schools, in terms of some housing policy. But also, I suppose, if we take a step back, what we're seeing is a loss of Conservative experience in Parliament, but also a generational change in the party. The Conservatives after this election are going to look, I think, a lot younger. Yeah, lots more Zahawi, Clark, all these people. But anyway, let's go and talk to our panel. We have Sienna Rogers, who is a writer for The House magazine. We have James Heal from The Spectator. And we have Luke Trill, the director of More in Common and also a pollster. Now, what do you think is driving this, James? I mean, what are they telling you, the MPs on the ground?
Well, I think there's a mix of factors, as Joe was saying there. I think it's partly about personalities, and I think about people deciding, look, they were going to go anyway. This election was brought forward. They made a snap decision, which was brought forward over the past few days or so. And I think that for them, it's about that. But also, a lot of them are thinking, look, I'm not going to keep my seat next time. And really, then some of them are thinking about, are we going to enjoy 10 years of opposition or not? I think the thing about Michael Gove, which was so surprising, was that he was someone who was not only just, a great sort of, person in government, etc., but also was a great thinker within the party as well. And he was someone who'd contributed, for instance, to the Onward Reform think tank. He was someone who we thought would play a big role in the debates afterwards in shaping the futures of the party. And also a great parliamentary performer as well. He'd been great in opposition, smashing into the Labour government. I think he's probably one of only two parliamentary speakers we can remember in the last 10 years, that and Hilary Benn during the airstrike. So I think it's a big loss today to the Conservative Party and to the government as well. OK, well, Sienna, how are Labour sort of viewing these opening salvos of the campaign? What's going on in the Conservative Party?
Well, I think they're delighted. I mean, obviously, the fact that so many Conservative MPs are announcing that they're not going to be standing is bad for morale in the Conservative Party. It means that, the more MPs announce this, then the more MPs follow. And someone like Michael Gove, as James was saying, I mean, he's such a good speaker. He's so he's so intelligent, he's so confident when he's doing interviews. You know, he speaks so kind of fluidly and really giving his sort of honest opinion in a way that actually they really lack those kind of media performers. So I think people in the Labour Party are pretty pleased about how it's going, especially after that pretty dreadful start in terms of the launch of the campaign in the rain.
Oh yes, yes. Any response in any you see in the polls to the opening salvos of this campaign?
Yeah, well, we asked voters for their reaction to both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak's speeches. We did a word cloud of them, and it won't surprise you to know the word in the centre of Rishi Sunak's word cloud was wet. Yeah. That was what
it has different meanings, but we mean physically wet.
But in this case, it meant physically wet. Interestingly, Keir Starmer's wasn't all complimentary, but the biggest word was change. And when we've done focus groups already in the campaign, that's what we're hearing back. It's not necessarily that people are in love with Labour. In fact, they're not, but they're saying after 14 years, it's time for a change. And I think that is the biggest headwind the Conservatives are facing. People just want to, even if it's rolling the dice, take a go with someone else.
So James,
I thought you were going to say dry, Luke, as his biggest word, because he is accused of being a bit boring sometimes.
James, this is a logistical challenge, though, isn't there now, and just getting the right number of candidates in place in time.
Absolutely, and I think that there's actually a story in The Guardian tonight about all the thousands of pounds that have gone to Michael Gove's seat in Surrey Heath. He's got a majority of around 18,000. I think the Lib Dems did quite well there recently in the local elections, and now they've got to find a new candidate to go in there. So I think it's about ensuring which battles do you pick, which seats do you try and save. And I think that right now there are very few kind of Conservatives who are really can be said to be safe seats going across the country. And I think a lot of people over the next 6 weeks will be wondering, whether they ought to have declared whether they were going sooner or not. So I think it's going to be a really, really tough fight on the hands. And I think that, as Luke said, the prevailing mood seems to be one of change. And I think what's striking is that on Labour's left, it's the party that are offering change in a different form, which is really striking.
We will get onto that later. You're not going anywhere. Do stay there for now. But we're going to put some of this to Kevin Hollinrake, the business minister and Sunak loyalist. I just have to clarify, you're not standing down, are you, Kevin?
I am not, Faz. I'm looking forward to the general election and the campaign.
And what message do you think it sends out that some of the big beasts are kind of fleeing the ship? Are not even bothering to fight the election?
Well, I think it's, as Joe Pike said earlier, we have a lot of members of Parliament. Some are bound to stand down. Michael Gove's been around for 20 years. I was his PPS for 5 years. Greg Clark, a similar number of years. John Redwood, 27 years. People do think there's life after politics, and people have different reasons for stepping down, but we'll have candidates in every seat, good candidates. As Michael said, there'll be new blood entering Parliament, and that's a good thing for Parliament. And, we're very confident we can fight a good campaign and we can close that gap and get past Labour. That's our objective.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a minute, Kevin. But just to begin with, obviously we wrapped up parliamentary activity today. The Postal Services Minister, you've got through that important compensation given what happened to the sub-postmasters, but the smoking ban, football governance, renters reform bill, Martin's Law, all dropped.
Well, I was delighted, as you said, the convictions were overturned today, which is a monumental thing for hundreds of people. So that was the biggest priority. It's very difficult in what we call wash-up. You have 2 days to do everything. And there's lots of those pieces of legislation were just not progressed enough to take them through, sadly. But that's the way things go. But they're all there to be reintroduced if we win the next election. If we don't, well, the current opposition can choose what they want to do. But those things, it's not that we've lost ambition for these things. It's just they live to fight another day.
OK. Well, let's just talk about the campaign. I mean, do you think it's working?
Yes, I do. I think it will work because I think for the first time, you, the media, as you do, will do the things you do best, which is put both leaders under scrutiny. And Rishi's had a lot of that, our Prime Minister, a lot of scrutiny, understandably. That's what you're there for. But there's been precious little scrutiny of Keir Starmer, and it will become perfectly evident that all he ever does is stand on the sidelines and criticise. He does not have a plan. We have a plan, it's working. Things are turning around. If you cast your mind back 18 months ago, inflation was at 11%. Now it's just over 2%. The economy was forecast to go into a deep recession. It didn't. It's now growing as faster than any other country in the G7. Things are turning around. Okay. People can take a risk, of course, and I hear the word cloud you referred to about change, but I would say to people, be careful what you wish for, because Keir Starmer could really take us back a long way after we've made an awful lot of progress.
Right, well, we can see that that's a central message, but I mean, all these sort of metaphorical mishaps. I mean, it's Ruth Davidson, your former Scottish leader, who said, is there a double agent in CCHQ? Our candidates deserve better after the sort of remarkable introduction to the campaign without an umbrella. We've got the Titanic today. It doesn't seem to be as slick as we're used to from CCHQ.
Well, Faisal, you can spend too much time on Twitter, I would say to you. There's some really substantive questions that people want answers to. How will we deal with the economy? How do we build on the progress we've made the last few years? We've got a clear plan for that. How will we deal with the small boats, people coming across the channel, making the dangerous journey? We've got a clear plan for that. Rwanda, which will prove a massive deterrent.
Well, hasn't proved anything so far, has it? You had to pay it.
Well, I don't agree with that.
Went.
I don't agree with that. You've read, I'm sure you've reported on people going to Ireland rather than coming to the UK. It's already having an effect, and it will have a greater effect as it gets off the ground. And that'll be July. So people can choose.
Okay.
If people want more illegal migration, they can vote Labour.
Well,
if you want less illegal migration, vote Conservative.
I get the message. Labour say they do have a plan. We'll talk to them later. But the timing was a gamble from Rishi Sunak, wasn't it? And it's sort of, he's taken this sort of turn in the economy, and he's taken the timing of the flights, and he's gone for it. But he seemed to sort of catch his own party on the hop.
Well, if you're going to call election, you've got to be careful who you tell, clearly, because that can easily leak out, the world of politics. So yes, it was very bold, but he's very decisive. And that's what people want in a leader. They want somebody who takes bold decisions. He's done that through COVID. He's done that through the cost of living crisis. He's turned the economy around. He'll deal with the NHS. He'll deal with the small boats crisis. We know what he stands for. People do not know what Keir Starmer stands for, and it could be an awful lot worse than we've got now. I think it will be.
We must leave that there. Thanks very much, Kevin Hollenrake, for joining us there. Now, all of this might leave the Labour Party feeling a little bit upbeat about the general situation in the election campaign. Joe Pike is just going to talk to us now, because obviously this has been a fairly big move in terms of Jeremy Corbyn deciding to stand against the party he led only a few years back. How is Labour feeling about, if you like, the threat from the left, and how does this Jeremy Corbyn decision feed into that? I
think it's a distraction, first of all, and it could take a lot of Labour resources, because ideally they want to win and win clearly in this seat. But some in the party also argue that it could be the best example of how Keir Starmer at least would argue that his party has changed. At the last general election, Jeremy Corbyn was Labour's candidate to be Prime Minister, although of course Keir Starmer was backing him at the time. This time he is no longer in the party, he's standing against the party. So perhaps the optics Keir Starmer will use to argue that the party has changed, but there could be activists to the left of the Labour Party who use that constituency as a focal point. Some argue it could be a pretty messy campaign, and clearly it's one that the Labour Party want to win.
OK, well, let's speak to the Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh. She's joining us from Sheffield. Thanks, Louise Haigh, for joining us. You were on Jeremy Corbyn's front bench. You must be sad to see this.
Well, look, it's far from ideal, the situation that Jeremy has landed himself in over several years now, but Keir Starmer was absolutely right to remove him as a Labour MP several years ago now, after he refused to apologise for his role and his leadership in the way that he handled the anti-Semitism crisis in the Labour Party and the response to the inquiry by the EHRC. But look, we will fight the Islington North constituency, just as we will fight every constituency and fight for every vote in this general election. And we are confident that with our credible but radical programme for change across the country, that we can win votes across the coalition that we need to build.
Okay, so I can see that Keir Starmer is trying to define himself against Jeremy Corbyn's Labour. But, in 2017, 10 million people voted for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour. I mean, what are you saying to those people that backed him? What are you saying to those people?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But in 2019, we suffered the worst election defeat in our history. So we've had to change our party from top to bottom, and Keir has made no apologies for that. We've had to look out to the country and provide a different offer at this general election. But what I would say is it is built on the rock of economic stability, as you will have heard Rachel Reeves say time and time again. But that doesn't mean it doesn't offer real hope or real change. And I was really proud to set out our plans just last month on how we will bring our railways back into public ownership. Keir and Ed Miliband have been out today talking about establishing the publicly owned Great British Energy that will act as a challenger to the private energy market. Angela Rayner has been working to set out our expansion of workers' rights. I do think there is a really credible but ambitious programme for change that we're setting out that I believe will attract voters from right across the political spectrum. And as I say, we'll fight for every vote in every constituency across the country.
OK, one of the issues upon which you may be losing voters to the left is obviously what happened in Gaza. We've had a development today in terms of the International Court of Justice. Would a Labour government agree with that verdict that Israel should halt incursions into Rafah?
We absolutely support the independent international institutions that are there to uphold international humanitarian law. When we talk about states abiding by international law, there has to be a system and processes which are there to judge and which are to uphold those laws and those structures. So Keir has been very clear. We support the ICJ, we support the ICC, and we have been saying for a very long time now that we do not support any incursion into Rafah by the Israeli government. There is already a humanitarian crisis, obviously, on the ground, but it's quite clear now that a full-scale offensive would breach international law.
OK. Do you recognise that you're losing votes on the left to Greens and Independents? And is that OK from your perspective because you're gaining votes in the centre ground?
No, we'd never want to lose votes, obviously. We'd never play fast and loose with anybody's vote. And we do reflect that at the local elections there were issues in certain communities and certain areas of the country to Independents and Greens, as you say. And I think we have been working really hard at a local and a national level to rebuild trust with some of those communities and people who feel very passionately and very reasonably about the war in Gaza. I've campaigned on the issue of Palestine for many years and for recognition for many years of Palestine. So I understand why people feel so passionately about this, and we are working to rebuild trust. But the circumstances have changed dramatically over the last few months as well, and that is why our position in upholding the international institutions, the ICC and the ICJ, are crystal clear now. OK,
we must leave that there. Thanks very much, Lou Haig. Moving on, live facial recognition is being used on our streets more and more. The Metropolitan Police has ramped up its use and has told Newsnight it's arrested 192 people so far this year using the technology. But its use in a real-time scenario means there's very little room for error. Here's James Clayton.
This is policing with a difference in Bethnal Green in East London.
What's going on here looks to be pretty innocuous, but in fact, this is one of the most controversial uses of tech in modern policing.
As people walk by this van, their faces are being scanned, checked to see if they're wanted for questioning by the police. They could be arrested on the spot. It's called live facial recognition, but questions have been raised about its accuracy.
That's when I felt the nudge on the shoulder, saying, at that time I'm wanted.
And whether using it is even lawful.
I think it absolutely is a Wild West at the moment. That's what creates this legal uncertainty.
Facial recognition has become incredibly powerful. Last year I filmed with a US company called Clearview that provides facial recognition systems for US law enforcement. I gave them this photo and out pops images of me from the web. It can be astonishingly accurate. In East London, the day we filmed, the Metropolitan Police told the BBC that 6 people were arrested as a result of the tech, some for serious crimes. We spoke to people who'd been flagged by police who confirmed that the ID was correct. But that doesn't mean the system is perfect. Sean is an anti-knife campaigner and works for the youth advocacy group Street Fathers.
You're good.
On his way back home in London Bridge in February, he was stopped by the police.
As I'm walking through, I saw a van. It wasn't plated with all the police stickers. It was a plain white van. I walked past that. I'm just focused on going to where I'm going, you know, getting through, yeah? And then all of a sudden, that's when I felt the nudge on the shoulder, saying, at that time, I'm wanted. They asked me if I had any ID. So I said, no, I got my bank card. But they start asking me about fingerprints. I said, nah, I'm not giving you no fingerprints.
He was held for around 20 minutes, only being let go when he provided a copy of his passport. It wasn't him.
How did it make you feel?
Very angry. I'm doing something good. So you're now guilty before proven innocent. Like, that's how it looks to me.
The BBC understands the mistake may have been due to a family resemblance. The Met didn't want to comment on the stop. Big Brother Watch, a group that campaigns against the use of facial recognition, filmed the stop.
Orwell would be rolling in his grave to think about live facial recognition cameras across the streets of London. In real time, you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of people walking down the street, minding their own business, who are effectively part of a police lineup. The sensible thing to do is to proactively seek people out if they're wanted by the police.
The Metropolitan Police didn't want to be interviewed as part of this piece, but they did tell the BBC that the vast majority of its stops are correct, that only 1 in 33,000 people walking by its cameras are mis-ID'd.
But for the people who triggered an alert, the figure is far less. According to the Met's own figures, about 1 in 40 people flagged this year by the technology is a false alert. It's not just the police, though, that uses live facial recognition. With shoplifting becoming an increasing problem, retailers have also begun using it. Sarah was out shopping in a Home Bargains store. She's asked to remain anonymous because she doesn't want to be associated with the crime that she was inaccurately accused of.
Within less than a minute, I'm approached by a store worker who is, he comes up to me and he says, "You're a thief, you need to leave the store."
So he accused you of being a thief?
Yeah, you've been identified as like someone who's stolen before. You're banned from all Home Bargains, all Co-op, all Flannels, Sports Direct. You can never go in these shops anywhere in the UK. And I was like, what? Why? Like, how can I fix this?
Sarah had been flagged by a facial recognition system run by a company called FaceWatch.
I kind of thought like, oh, will my life be the same? Like, am I going to be looked at as like a shoplifter when I've never stolen it? And like, I was just crying and crying like the entire journey home.
After challenging the match, FaceWatch eventually accepted that the match was a case of mistaken identity. FaceWatch told the BBC,
"Shoplifting has soared to unprecedented levels. However, it is the vulnerable shop staff that routinely and daily face the brunt of this. FaceWatch will proudly continue to champion these innocent frontline retail staff."
Home Bargains declined to comment. This technology is new and the laws governing the tech are unclear. Michael Birtwistle works at the Ada Lovelace Institute and he's looked into the legality of this tech.
We need primary legislation in order to achieve a sort of sufficient legal framework for this. In practice, that means someone being put in charge, either an existing regulator or a new regulator. It would mean someone that's setting the standards of how these technologies are used to make sure that they are held to scientifically validated levels of accuracy.
There are other concerns too, that the technology misidentifies people of colour more often, an accusation that the Metropolitan Police disputes. People we spoke to in diverse Bethnal Green were broadly positive about the tech.
We're advancing as humans, that's clearly a sign of advancement, so bring on.
I think it's a little bit scary. I think it represents the proliferation of surveillance into kind of every day.
Yeah, I do think it's a smart technique. It's a very smart technique to get people who are not, like, who think they've gotten away with a crime that they committed.
But for how long will this technology be effective? Won't criminals begin avoiding these vans? And won't shoplifters get better at concealing their identities? The question for this tech is, where does it go then?
Fascinating film there from James Clayton. But back to the panel now. Worth having a quick look at the papers. Something interesting going on here. One story dominating, we've been talking about it. Gove quits, ministers shock exit rocks Tories. That's the Express. Now Gove quits, Sunak sinking ship. Mirror, same story in the Eye, same story in the Times. Telegraph, slightly different story, but the Gove story's there too. But have a look at this in the Daily Mail. Shadow Chancellor makes pledge to Mail readers, Reeves, I'll never play fast and loose with your money. And it would probably be more of a story if she said the opposite. But the Daily Mail is obviously, there's a little bit of footsie going on with the Labour Party and the Daily Mail, which is intriguing. Is it not?
It's very interesting. I mean, I wouldn't have even run that as an exclusive myself. That's not really a story, is it? There's nothing there apart from I will be a good chancellor.
There's a warmish editorial on the Thursday too. So
yeah, it's very interesting that there is such positive coverage there. And I have heard shadow cabinet members talk about, the grey wall. This is another thing, a really big kind of target. And if they can get those kind of voters on board, I mean, that's a huge coup, and that means that they're going to be winning really big.
James is going to give us a scoop about the Telegraph now.
No, I'm just going to say on the Mail, I mean, no newspaper has caused more problems, more headaches for Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, of course, than the investigation into our housing affairs, which they really led on. So for the Mail, after all the front pages, absolutely, the last couple of years, a beer gate, to then come out with this front page in the beginning of an election campaign. I mean, in Labour, they'll be celebrating this tonight. And the Tories think, how on earth can you launch an attack on Starmer, etc., when the Mail is running these kind of front pages?
And so, Luke, is it true that Labour are actually making gains with older voters too, which we consider, a kind of axiom of British psephology, that the older voters are kind of go right and
Absolutely. If you look at the polls, the average age at which someone flipped from voting Labour to voting Conservative in 2019 was somewhere in the mid-40s. It's now over 65. It's actually over retirement age at which you start saying you're voting Conservative. So I think they'll be really pleased with this. But for another reason as well is we know the electorate are most fed up of chaos. They just want someone that will make the news quieten down, steady the ship a little bit, and I think that kind of headline in the Mail projects that image. It's, I'm not going to be fast and loose, you can trust me. It's going to go back to a bit of a quieter politics.
And then that, which feeds back into what we were talking about before with Lou Haig and with Joe about the Corbyn sort of return as an independent, attempt to take on his own party. How damaging do you think that will be?
Well, it's interesting. So I've been on this story today following what's happening in Islington North, and there is going to be some drama. So, for example, I revealed today that one Islington councillor has already been suspended from the Labour group because they have endorsed Jeremy Corbyn and are promoting his campaign materials and his activist sessions. So clearly there are going to be splits within Labour, people choosing, actually, I have to support Corbyn, I've known him for so many years in the local area, this kind of thing. So, of course, that's a little bit bruising, but on the other hand, the Labour leadership might go, well, it really defines the Keir Starmer project so far in opposition, which is this changed party, the changed Labour Party that he likes talking about so much. So on the one hand, Labour wants to portray this changed party. On the other hand, it does have that kind of tension of it wants that efficiency of votes across the country, but does that mean it's vulnerable in places like Islington North, like Thangham Debonair's seat in Bristol, and other examples?
Well, let's bring Luke on that. Are they underestimating the danger of less enthusiasm amongst sort of green-leaning, left-leaning?
Well, look, there's no doubt no political party wants to lose voters. And it is true that Labour have had a dip amongst the most progressive segment of the electorate. But it's a dip from around 67% of the vote to 60%. Okay. And those progressive voters tend to be in the safest Labour seats. So what you might see is the odd couple of problems in places like Islington, Bristol Central, certainly we spoke to voters there, Green voters there, who it was nothing to do with Gaza, nothing even to do with the environment. It was because they were so anti-politics, they were backing the Greens. So I don't think it's a problem now, but what will be interesting is if Labour do win the election, do the Greens start to cause the same problems that we've seen Reform UK causing the Tories? Yes. And I think that's the risk in office.
I want to pick that up. I think we've got a clip of Rishi Sunak from Northern Ireland. So let's just play that from this morning.
Prime Minister, we are just yards away from where the Titanic was built and designed. Are you captaining a sinking ship going into this election?
So if you look at what's happened over the past few weeks alone, you can see that our plan is working. Inflation has returned to normal. Energy bills just today, we received welcome news, are falling. Wages have been rising faster than prices for 10 months. And at the beginning of this year, our economy grew faster than pretty much all our major competitors.
So the same sort of answer, but the question and the setting of the Titanic, sort of metaphorical mishaps, there's been pretty much one a day.
Yes, I mean, I think to win this election, to make it competitive, Rishi Sunak, we need a perfect campaign. I think it's got off to an imperfect start right now. You know, that kind of image, and of course, with everyone sort of bailing out, I mean, it makes the puns all too easy.
And nobody's... People are saying this privately to you. The MP's absolutely clear. They won't say it on camera, of course.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, I just think that people are just, you know, privately, particularly people involved in campaigns before, are just texting me and saying, you know, what's happening, what's going on. And so I think that, you know, look, I can understand the frustration. The problem is that when you're 20 points behind, everything gets read in a certain way, which adds to this narrative. Yeah. And I think there was some frustration. You know, look, the Prime Minister was trying to see a thriving business in Northern Ireland, you know, in the kind of green technology, which he's very keen to talk about, and sort of the business plans that they've done post-Windsor framework. But the problem is when everything is in that kind of negative frame, it really is difficult to break out of that cycle. And right now, I'm not sure what's going to be able to turn things around in the next 6 weeks for him.
I'm quite intrigued by the concept of, you know, the Telegraph has been at the heart of 14 years of Conservative sort of internal wars. I mean, you've commentated on it, and some of your columnists became Prime Minister, all that sort of stuff. Do you see a mirror image to what might happen if the polls are right to Labour, a kind of revolt on the left to mirror the revolt on the right, if this happens?
I mean, I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens in terms of the kind of sort of Labour commentariat, etc. In terms of revolt, I mean, I think that it's probably more of a second-term issue in terms of the voters on the ground, as Luke was sort of talking about there, in what's happening with the Green voters, etc. But right now, I think Keir Starmer's got the right problems to think about, which is that he's piling up votes in Tory marginals, and he's very efficient in his voting element as well.
Last word for you, Sienna. I've got just 10 seconds.
I do think the other interesting thing would be splits in cabinet, but we're talking here assuming that Labour are winning the election. And this is
a long way to go. Yes.
There is a long way to go, but
many more of these panels. Well, we'll just leave that there, and that is all from us for tonight. Victoria's back on Tuesday. Until then, have a great bank holiday weekend. Good night. Thanks, Room.